Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the glazes that are available to you here at school. In our cabinet we have Mako glazes and Amico glazes, and those are glazes you'll put on your work after it's been fired. So you're going to put it on bisqueware. You can tell bisqueware when it's nice and white. This right here is bisqueware. This right here is greenware. Greenware is still really fragile. Bisqueware is still fragile. You can drop it on the ground and it will break, but it has a little bit of a different sound to it, and it's a lot more durable. Bisqueware is porous and it still absorbs glaze very easily, and we have lots and lots of choices available to you. Some of the things that you can do are underglazes, and then you can also do regular glazes. The underglazes are only in our cabinet, our yellow cabinet in the classroom, and the other glazes are all in the main cabinet. You'll notice in our main cabinet that it's very messy right now. It would be nice if everybody put the glaze back where it goes. We have Amico glazes, we have Mako glazes, and the Duncan glazes are on the bottom shelf. They're in a red container. So it'd be really great if you put everything back, then it makes it easier for you as well. You can find things back when you need to look for it again. I have a bunch of examples here for you, and I'll show you a couple of things that you can do. Some of the things I'd like you to know. All the glazes have these nice little tabs, and they're all hung up on those boards. On the back of them it should also tell you what like the number of the glaze and what kind of glaze they are. Make sure you put these back. Don't take them with you and put them in your bin, because then nobody else will know where those glazes are. If you cannot find your glaze, look around at the different tables, because they might just be at somebody's table. If you really cannot find it, let me know, and then if necessary we'll take that glaze tab away. I keep the underglaze and the regular glaze separate because the underglaze functions quite differently from regular glaze. Our underglaze works on both bisqueware and greenware, and then usually you would go over it with the regular glaze, either a matte or a glossy finish regular glaze. All the regular glazes are in the glaze cabinet, and as you can see, our glaze cabinet is not very clean or tidy or organized, and it would be really great if you guys could help me by keeping that organized. Make sure to only put clean glaze brushes and clean glaze containers back in the kiln room. It helps everybody. The same goes for the silverware that's here. There's some knives, there's some forks, there's even some spoons, I think, and you can use those to mix the glaze with a little bit of water. If the glaze just gets too thick, you can use one of those to mix it together. Make sure you clean that up really well before you put it in the glaze room. The reason we want to keep our utensils and our brushes and our containers clean is because we do not want to contaminate our glazes. Some of our glazes look quite similar in color to what they end up being in the end. Mostly our stroke and coat Mako glazes will look pretty much like the end result, but many of our other glazes do not. So you might put on a bright red glaze and it will turn out to be green at the end. Make sure you understand that. Also make sure that you always put glazes back in the proper containers. What I've done with these containers is I have put the name of the glaze on the lid, and so you make sure that the lid goes back on the proper container, especially because we do not want to contaminate our glazes, and be super careful with putting glazes back, that you're putting them back in the proper containers. This is a Mako underglaze, and here we have some Amico underglazes. They function in the very same way. These correspond with the numbers on the Amico glazes, and so you'll see here the names of them. We don't have all of these, and we have a lot of Mako glazes. The way underglazes work is that you can put them on both bisqueware and greenware. So this is our greenware, this is our bisqueware. It can go on either kind of clay. This bowl was first fired, so this is bisqueware that then I went over with a blue underglaze, and then I went back over it with a clear coat, and this has a matte finish clear coat. Did the same thing right here. First I impressed some leaves. On this side I drew the outlines of the leaves, and then rubbed first some underglaze in it, and you'll see that it settles in the cracks, it settles in the things I scratched into it. And then later I went over it with a little bit lighter green, and then I painted over them with underglaze, and you can see the same thing here. Again, I went over it afterwards with a matte coat underglaze. For this mug, I used underglazes, different colors underglaze. You can see here that it's very light. When you're using underglaze, make sure you do several layers. This one probably is maybe 3 layers. This one I think it got too thin, so this might just be 1 or 2 layers. This probably is 3 layers as well. With this underglaze, I put a clear coat over it, but this is a shiny clear coat. So this is glossy. I don't know if you can see the difference here between matte and glossy. These are actually crackle glazes, and I don't know if you can see it very well, but here you should be able to see how it has crackles on the glaze. These are, I think we have 4 colors. They're in a basket. These actually are Mako, but they're in a basket, I think, with the Amico glazes. I also here have this. I made this a test bowl, and then I put the different colors, and I tried seeing what they look like over underglazes, and so I painted a couple of different things on there, and just to see how this works. With the crackle glazes, you're going to paint those on, and I believe it tells you to put on 2 or 3 layers after it comes out of the kiln. Let it rest for about 2 days, and then you'll go back over it with some ink. Rub a little bit of ink on there with the brush, and then clean the rest off, and then the ink will settle in these cracks, and you'll wash the rest of it away. Here are the different options that we have. We have some of these that have crystals in them that create this interesting effect. Same here, the lava I think does some interesting things. This is our Duncan glaze. Our Duncan glazes tend to be not quite as shiny as the other glazes. This is an example of how something turns out with the Duncan glaze. Here you can see the effect you can achieve when you combine something like a Duncan glaze that's a little bit more matte and a much more glossy glaze, and it gives an interesting effect when you make those go against each other like that. Similarly, you can see a different Duncan glaze, and I think this is turquoise, and how those combine when you put them next to each other. I made some test mugs. These are mugs that people left behind, and then I went ahead and put the names of different things on it and see how they work together. Right here it has an interesting effect, and that's a pottery cascade. That's the kind of glaze that we have you painted over your glazes, and then it just flows in an interesting way. I make different test tiles just to see how glaze behaves on a surface with a texture. On the bottom here I'll write down what I did. I have some extra ones of these in case you want to do some of your own tests, especially when you're working on your canopic jar. You might want to do some test glazing to make sure the glaze is exactly how you want it to be. I will show you something called sgraffito. I've got a mug here, and you can see it's leather hard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put underglaze all over it. And I'm going to go ahead and first put 1 layer on, let it dry, and then go ahead and put another layer over on top of that. Otherwise it's just going to be too light. Alright, I put 2 coats of underglaze over here, so now I'm going to go ahead and do some sgraffito. What you can do with sgraffito, you can get a needle tool and you can just draw some designs in this. And there you go, and once it dries those will be easier to take out. But this is sgraffito, so everything that I've just carved into will become white, and those will be more that I can then later also put some underglaze in. Alright, so here you can see I've carved into this, so all the parts that are now gray are going to show up as white once it's been fired. And of course I sign my name on the bottom, and this is going to be drying, and then it will be ready to go into the kiln. Here's a bowl that I've put underglaze on, and then I've scratched into it. You can kind of see the lines right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of underglaze on it and then rub it away again. So I mixed some underglaze right here. Then I want to use a clean brush, so this brush is nice and clean. I'm going to add a little bit of water because I want it to be pretty watery when I do this. And I'm going to go ahead, and you can see how it mostly wants to settle into those cracks. And I just want to make sure that I get underglaze in all the little crevices. And I'll do the same on the outside. Got it everywhere I want it to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use I'm going to use one of our sea sponges, put some water on it, and I'm going to go ahead and use that to clean off the excess. So then the dark underglaze will stay in the cracks and it will reveal the greenish color underneath. And I'll keep doing that to this side as well. And the more water I use, the more times I go over it, the more of the excess I'll take off. But I like having it show up in some of these cracks. I think that looks nice. So I'm not going to take all of it away. And when I'm done with this, I'll let it dry, and then I'll go ahead and use some matte glaze on top of this. And then it will get fired again. Because you can see it's already been fired, it's already bisqueware. Alright, I'm going to let that dry. You can see that this one is matte. We also have another one which is crystal clear. This is the glossy one. But I prefer this one right here. And I'm going to just shake the bottle a little bit. I am going to grab a nice clean cup. Grab a nice clean cup. And Alright, here is my clear glaze. Here's my bowl. And I'm just going to start putting a layer of this to cover everything. And you see it's a different color now from when it dries. I'll show you in a minute what it looks like when it dries. Make sure you let it dry in between layers. And this goes on pink, but once it's been fired, it will be clear. This now has had one coat. You can see this is nice and dry, and I'll go ahead and put my second coat on it with the clear coat. So I'll go right back over it. You'll stop seeing what's underneath, and that's totally okay. On the bottle itself, it says to put 3 layers, so when you look at this, right here, it will say apply 3 coats. Make sure you just look at every glaze you have because it will say something. It'll usually say 2 or 3 coats. Okay, so I'm working on my 3rd layer, and as you can see, I'm leaving a nice edge here that doesn't have any glaze on it because I don't want to have it stick to the bottom of the kiln shelf, so I stay nicely away from the very, very bottom of it. I finished putting my 3rd coat on here, so now I'm going to put the glaze back in the glaze bottle, so I'll move this out of the way. Alright, so I'm carefully putting the glaze back in here. This is why you need a very clean brush and a clean container because you don't want to contaminate this glaze. And I try to get as much as possible out of here. And get as much as possible off the brush as well. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'll put the glaze back in the glaze room. Now I'll make sure that I wash the brush and the container. I finished glazing, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this glaze container really well and the brush too. Both my glaze container and brush are clean, and I'll put those back in the kiln room. Make sure when you put the brush away that you put it like that in the containers in the kiln room. That way, if it sits like this, it's going to hurt the bristles, so make sure you always have it handle side down. Alright, that's it. Have fun!